strangling, and he had been stabbed several times in the chest, including a stab to his lung. He had a skull fracture on the right side of his head from being beat in the head as well. Overall, they got the impression that this dude had to have endured some level of torture. Like, the fact that Roland is even alive at this point is fucking mind-boggling. Whoever this was, they really wanted his ass gone. Anyway, Dr. Flanders arrives and asks Roland who the fuck did this, to which Roland says, nobody. So they ask, well, how did you get your ass beat then? And he says he had fallen and hit his head in the bathtub. Did the tub tie you up too and then let you fall onto a knife several times? Like, what the fuck, Roland? Anyway, Flanders is like, was this you trying to kill yourself? And Roland is like, nah, that ain't it either. After which he passes out. They take him to the hospital, and by the time he gets there, he is in a coma. And sadly, he dies just after midnight that night. Rest in peace, Roland. So, back at the hotel, police start working the scene. They interviewed Jean, who was the woman next door in room 1048, remember? They thought it interesting that they shared the same last name, and were literally a room apart from each other. However, after speaking with her and her boyfriend, they came to the conclusion that these people had no idea who Roland was and were not related to this incident. Now, when searching the room, the police did notice the lack of personal belongings in the room, to which Randy was like, nah, that's just how he showed up. He didn't have shit with him. They found a tag, though, from a necktie that stated it was made in New Jersey. And they noticed that all the soap, shampoos, and towels in the room were actually gone. They did not find any knife in the room, which finally, apparently, led them to rule out suicide. They noted the cords he was tied up with indicated someone or someones were involved. They found one of the room glasses in the bathroom sink, and it was missing a piece. I'm assuming that means it was like chipped or broken. They also found a hairpin, a safety pin, an unsmoked cigarette, and a full bottle of diluted sulfuric acid. The acid was a head scratcher to me, so I looked up to see what the uses of sulfuric acid were back then. Lots of big words in history lessons about acids that are too long and boring to read came up, but the general idea I got was that it was used like as a form of like chlorine bleach until actual bleach replaced it sometime shortly after. So I guess that makes a little bit more sense as to why that would be found in there. Anyway, lastly, the police found 4 fingerprints that were fairly small, leading them to believe they were from a woman. They ran them against Roland just to be sure, as well as all of the known hotel staff that were in the room, and they were all no match. So at this point, they reached out to the media in hopes of getting help with the case through tips. Now, shortly after the start of the investigation, it became clear to investigators that Roland was not actually Roland. Being that Roland gave a Los Angeles residential address at the time of checking in, they sent his info to the LAPD in hopes of contacting his next of kin, but they got nothing back. They sent Roland's fingerprints to the Justice Department's Bureau of Investigation, aka the FBI. I guess that's what it was called before it was the FBI. And with the media's help, investigators ran photos and drawings of Roland in the newspaper in hopes of people being able to identify him. They even had an open viewing at the funeral home for people to come and actually look at him in person to better get an idea of identifying him. Enter mistaken cab driver Robert. Robert let police know of his strange encounter the night before the murder. He said he was pretty sure it was Roland, and when he came to the funeral home and saw the same ominous scratch on the guy's arm, that sealed it for him. Police were a little less convinced, being that none of the hotel staff could confirm seeing Roland leave the hotel that night. However, they somehow were able to establish a sighting of Roland at a liquor store with 2 women. How? I don't know. And why that account was better than Robert's, I have no fucking clue. But I guess it feeds the theory that a woman was involved, so they went with it. Randy told the police he remembered Roland stating that he stayed a night at the price gouging hotel. Police headed over to the hotel that I can't pronounce, but no Roland had been on record of staying there. However, the staff did recall a man that looked a lot like him, and who also gave a Los Angeles home address, who had stayed a night under the name Eugene K. Scott. So the police sent that name back to LAPD in hopes of getting a hit, but again, they got nothing. Several false identifications aroused during the investigation as well. One being a man who thought Roland was his cousin, only for his sister to later confirm that the cousin died sometime before this, but that they did look a lot alike. The other being a wrestler promoter named Tony, who swore that he had referred Roland, who at the time was going by the name Cecil Werner, to a buddy of his in Omaha, Nebraska back in December. But after following that lead, the Nebraska guy didn't recognize Roland. Unfortunately, days after Roland's death, several new homicides occurred and the police were pulled to those, and steam slowly started to fade in this case. It was worked, but not as vigorously as it had been in the initial few days. So fast forward to March, the newspapers ran a story about how the funeral home where Roland was viewed at was going to have to bury him in the city's, like, sad people's graves, where they bury people who have no one or like, unknown people. That same day, though, they received a call from a man who asked them to delay the burial so that he could send them money to get Roland properly buried at the Memorial Park Cemetery so as to, quote, be buried near his sister, end quote. The context was unclear as to if he meant his own sister or Roland's sister, but either one is kind of fucking creepy. So the funeral home was like, what the fuck? You know, we have to tell the police this, right? He's part of a murder investigation and nobody knows who he is. The caller's like, oh, I know, I don't care. Do you? So the funeral home continued on asking, why was he killed? And the caller says, oh, it's because Roland was cheating on his fiancée with another woman. The caller then says that the two women and himself arranged this meeting at the president in order to exact revenge. And, quote, cheaters usually get what's coming to them. And with that, he fucking hung up. The funeral people were like, okay. But they postponed the service, though, and on March 23rd, they received a delivery envelope that was very precisely addressed with all the letters measuring to the same equal size, and it had $25, which at the time equaled like $500 today dollars. That was wrapped in a newspaper in the envelope. It was unknown who sent it, but it did cover the costs of the proper burial. 2 additional weird envelopes were sent to 2 local florists as well, with $5 in each of them, along with a call that was received. However, what was exactly said is unknown, but it's assumed that they were about the same weird story. Notes were enclosed in these envelopes the florists received, with disguised writing saying, "Love forever, Louise," and also requesting 13 American Beauty roses for Roland's grave. The funeral ended up happening, and the only people that attended were the investigators from the case. Some were undercover as grave diggers and hung out at the cemetery a few days after just in case anyone else showed up, but nothing came of that. Police also tracked the phone calls that were made to the florists, but they were found to have originated from payphones, and that led nowhere. Several days after the funeral, an unknown woman called the media outlet that originally ran the story about Roland being buried in a sad unknown grave and told them they needed to fix that story because he was actually given a proper burial. When they asked who the fuck she was and how the fuck she knew this, she said, quote, "Never mind that. I know what I'm talking about." And when they pushed her further for more info, she simply said he got into a jam. And then she hung the fuck up. Police were never able to identify who the caller was. Media continued to run his story in hopes of identifying him, and it started picking up nationwide interest. It eventually reached a woman in Birmingham, Alabama named Ruby Ogletree. A friend showed her the article in the paper, and she recognized the man to be Artemis Ogletree, her son. She calls up the Kansas City PD and is able to give them enough corroborating proof that she knows him, including the reasoning for that weird bald patch/scar on his head, which she says he got from a grease burn as a kid. They finally confirm that Roland is in fact Artemis, aka Artie. Ruby, however, has a story to tell. She tells police her son left home at the age of 17 and was headed to Los Angeles. She says she hasn't seen or heard from him since, except for 3 letters from Artie, but that the letters are weird as fuck, and they don't sound like her son. Several of the letters had actually been typed, and as far as she knew, Artie didn't know how to use a typewriter. The wording and the phrasing was not matching to how Artie would have talked, and the worst part was that several of the letters had actually been sent to her after his death. In May of 1935, Ruby received a special same-day delivery letter from Artie saying he was traveling to Europe that very day. The letter was traced to New York, but the trail went cold from there. 3 months later, Ruby got a call from Memphis, Tennessee from a man who claimed that he knew Artie and that Artie had saved his life but lost his hand during the fight, hence not being able to write to his mother anymore, but that he was healthy and well and living in Cairo, Egypt, where he married a wealthy woman. What a fucking tale to tell, man. If you were trying to keep shit smelling fresh, I feel like the bar fight where Artie loses his hand and can't write and then marries a rich woman in Egypt isn't the story to spin. But Ruby talked to this guy for about half an hour, and she said that he sounded like he was a fucking crazy person, but that he did have an extensive knowledge of Artie. The guy even gave her his name, but the police never revealed that name to the public. Police, of course, followed the Egypt lead, but they found no sign of Artie. They did not rule out the possibility of him traveling under a fake name, but they had no way of knowing what that fake name would have been. Police were able to uncover a third hotel that Artie had stayed at in Kansas City, called the St. Regis. Here, he had actually roomed with another man. Police attempted to find out if this guy was the mysterious Don that Artie didn't want to have breakfast with that one time, but they were never able to confirm the man's identity. In 1937, New York police arrested a man named Joseph Martin, who had killed a man he roomed with and put the body in a trunk to be shipped to Memphis, Tennessee. Of the many aliases that Joseph used, Donald Kelso was found, which had them thinking this was the Don. According to the New Yorker, police were even able to match some of Joseph's writing samples to the letters Ruby received from Artie. And even with all this evidence, they still were unable to bring charges to Joseph for Artie's murder. The case went cold eventually, with detectives still reviewing it every couple years, but with no new evidence, it just wasn't able to go anywhere. Randomly enough, in 2003, 2004-ish, this guy named John Horner, who is a local, history person at Kansas City Library, claimed he received a call from someone out of state stating that they were helping an estate sale of some random person who had passed away, and they found a box with a bunch of newspaper clippings about Artie's death, along with an unnamed item that had been mentioned in the newspapers that tied the owner of the box to the murder. They literally gave nothing else of use, though. Horner claims he didn't want to make this public until he finished the blog he was writing about the retelling of the story, which was finished in 2012. Now, personally, John, I think you're full of shit, and you can blow that garbage right out your ass. You clearly just wanted attention drawn to your sad blog. Otherwise, why not give that info to police and see if they could have traced the call? But anyway, to this day, nobody knows what happened in room 1046, or who killed Roland/Artie. Popular theories do revolve around the mob maybe having a hit out on Artie, hence the mysterious Dawn no one can find. Others believe the fiancé/love affair story. But me, I think it was Joseph Martin. I think the evidence all lines up. The alias of Dawn, him being arrested in New York, as he was shipping his dead roommate's body to Memphis, where he called Ruby from, and the letters from Artie to Ruby that match his writing, and of course, obviously, him killing a man he was rooming with. I think it all lines up. But what are your theories? I'm dying to know. Feel free to leave them in the comment section on my Instagram or Twitter page, and while you're at it, click the like and follow button while you're there too. I hope you enjoyed this mini hour of Hotels from Hell, and keep listening for more spooky spooks here at the Vanishing Hour.